Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out to join us this afternoon. Welcome to our event, Integration, Then, Now, in the Future, Voices from the Community. We will have robust conversation and meaningful conversation today from our panelists, and we'd like to welcome our panelists, along with our moderator, Monica Denise Griffin. First and foremost, I wanted to ask the team to stand because it takes a lot of work to bring things together sometimes, and these guys have worked really hard, so I would like to thank them. Team. All right, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. First of all, we have Ms. Sylvia Willis. Ms. Willis is a mother of 2 Lafayette High School graduates, and she graduated from James Blair, the class of 1968. Next, this woman needs no introduction. Miss Edith Cookie Hurd, my mentor, my sister, and my friend. She is a graduate of Bruton Heights, class of 1960. Edith went back to college when she was 50 years old and obtained her degree. Christopher Newport. Next, we have Miss Janice Kennedy. Janice was born and raised in Williamsburg, Virginia, and attended Williamsburg-James City County Public Schools. She has raised 6 children and presently works for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation as a museum educator, interpreter, and she attends First Baptist Church on Scotland Street, where she is a member of the trustee board. Next, we have Philip Kennedy. Philip is an executive board member of the village, and Philip Kennedy is the son of Eli and Trini Kennedy, husband of 29 years to Dr. Victoria Kennedy, and father to Keenan and Kyle, and U.S. Marine veteran. Philip is a Lafayette High School graduate. He holds a bachelor degree in psychology from Christopher Newport University, a master's degree in instructional design from Western Governors University, and an education specialist degree from Liberty University. At present, he is a doctoral student at Liberty University studying why African American male teachers remain in K-12 education. Next, we have Xavier Carter. Xavier is an early graduate of 2018, Lafayette High School graduate. She will be starting a semi-new career change next spring to obtain her bachelor's degree in business administration, with hopes of a position with the Williamsburg-James City County School Board. Her reason is for her son and all future generations. She wants to see them have a fighting chance and to see familiar faces, faces that look like her, and a change for the future. Our moderator for the afternoon is Monica Denise Griffin from the College of William and Mary. And if you would all stand at this time and join us as we sing Lift Every Voice and Sing. The Negro American
Rejoicing, rise, high as the listening.
discussion with some questions that we have sent out to the panelists in advance. And after that, we will open the floor to have discussion and questions, and a few of our honored guests are here that may have a few short words to say, and then we will move on to a reception. Thank you all so much again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for organizing the village and putting together this event for the community. And welcome, everyone. I invite you to join me in learning from this panelists and their learned experience and the expertise therein about changes in the Williamsburg-James City County over the last decade or so. By way of full disclosure, my involvement with Williamsburg-James City County Public School has been primarily through my role as director of the Sharp Community Scholars Program at William & Mary, and in some capacity with their previous Minority Student Achievement Advisory Council under the leadership of Dr. Angelina Hopkins several years ago. Thank you and welcome, panelists. We are honored to learn from you today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. My role is to make sure that we keep moving along and that everybody contributes as meaningfully as possible to the questions. Professor Quirk is going to help me out, so you might see her put up a little piece of paper every so often. I'm going to do my best to politely interrupt you and ask that you try to keep track of any thoughts that I disrupt, but not take it personally, so that we can be sure to get as much of what you have to say and then allow for time for questions and answers. Let's start with the beginning. For those of you who attended segregated and integrated schools, we tend to focus on what was gained by school integration, but what was lost? If we could start with Ms. Hurd.
Mrs. Hurd did not go to an integrated school. I went to a segregated school. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I graduated from Bruton Heights School, and we were taught at Bruton Heights that we were the greatest things in Williamsburg. And when we would walk past Matthew Whaley School, to us as children, our teachers taught us that that was small town. And one reason we were taught that was because when Bruton Heights was built, it was one of the first schools in Virginia that had selective courses. You could choose and pick what classes you wanted. And we had typing, we had French, we had chemistry, and we had a chemistry lab with the gas pipes and everything in it. So I never did experience integrated school system, but I integrated the workforce.
What was lost? When we went to James Blair in 1965, there were 14 in my class that went over. We were cohesive. We stayed together. We did everything together because we had no one else to do it with. And so therefore the closeness with everyone else from Bruton Heights, because it was 1st through 12th grade. We knew everybody. I mean, Cookie's older than I am, but I knew Cookie. I'm just saying, from 1st through 12th grade. 12th graders knew me in the 1st grade. So we had a lot of closeness. We were together. We had friendships. And something else that was lost when I went to James Blair: respect, manners, discipline. It was just lost. It seems like the kids at Blair could say to their mother something I would never ever say to mine, or else I wouldn't be sitting here today. But it has lingered with me throughout my life, and I'm very grateful for that. Also, positive role models. We had role models at Bruton Heights. If I may ask, is there a teacher in here who taught at James Blair when I was there? Who? Hi. And with whom am I going to speak with?
My name is Camilla Buchanan, but in those days it was Camilla Spurn, and I taught chemistry and physics.
You didn't know me. No. Well, I did take it, but I think I took it before I came over at Bruton Heights. I was a business major, so I did the typing and shorthand or whatever goes with that. But it was just it was separateness. We weren't together.
For those of you who attended only integrated schools, were the schools you attended still integrated, or have they become segregated in new ways? Let me start with you, Mrs. Kennedy.
When I went to school, they were integrated. And some of those schools are not actually active schools today. I did go to Matthew is. They were integrated, but for me, my experience was different. There were role models there, but I don't know so much that I identified with them. There were a few people in the classroom that looked like me. It was so sparsely populated that I always felt alone in the classroom. And as a young child trying to find a way to build my self-esteem, your parents can't always be there with you 24/7, especially at the time that I came up. My mother was working, trying to get the food on the table. So I don't think she felt like I had any issue with self-esteem, anything like that, but you're trying to find a way to identify and to feel whole in the classroom, find something positive to identify with. And not to avoid your question, but when I was looking over the questions that Ms. Bridgeworth sent to me, I kept having a hard time trying to come up with answers, and I thought about it. My experiences in school, to be honest with you, were so hard for me. I think I blocked a lot of it. I really blocked a lot of it. So little things come back. Mostly what I remember is the pain. And I did use it as something to help me guide my children so they would have a different experience. And be able to get what they were supposed to get, even if they didn't see people in the room that looked like them, or if there was no one there to say anything positive to them, or tell them about opportunities that were available, but they would find a way to reach within themselves and go forward and get it. So it was very different for me. Integration, I think, was a good thing. But I do think we lost a lot of ourselves by trying to identify and assimilate with what was supposed to be positive, and not looking at who we were and what we were as a community and as a people as being very positive.
I'm going to let Mr. Kennedy answer, but then there's a set of other questions coming up regarding it, because not very necessary.
Well, I've only attended integrated schools. But though the schools were integrated, I graduated Lafayette in 1986. So though the schools were integrated by law within the schools, they were still segregated. The neighborhood I lived in was all black. At that time in the 80s when I was there, I think the ratio to Lafayette, we only had one high school, was probably right around 30% African American and 70% white, from what I recall. And I know we just kind of stayed amongst ourselves. And when you were amongst Caucasian students, you were looked at as if you were not good enough to be with the Caucasian students. And so for me, the pain does resonate. I kind of agree with Ms. Kennedy here to my right. There's things that you experience and you just take with you for the rest of your life, and that's part of the reason why I became a teacher. I knew at Lafayette, my experience was that the white teachers didn't care. I felt that they gave more attention to the white students than the black students. We were viewed largely as behavior problems. And the stigma kind of just stays with you. Now, even with that said though, I had some fantastic teachers in Williamsburg-James City County Schools. One is sitting here today, Miss Farrenholt. Okay, she will always be Miss Farrenholt to me. But
That component. Thank you. About whether it's still integrated or segregated. Have they become segregated in any ways?
So, like he said, by law they are, but in the schools they are, for the most part, still segregated. I have had to pick and choose growing up. It wasn't easy in elementary, nor was it easy in middle school. It got a little easier in high school because I learned, and a lot of it was self-taught outside of family, that I didn't have to pick and choose because I'm biracial. And I would be with, a mixed group, some white students, black students, of other races, and you would see separated groups of all those races looking at a mixed bunch, and some are angry, some are joking, some are laughing. And amongst the teachers, it's like the same thing. And I had in total maybe 4 either biracial or black teachers in the 12 years that I was in school, and none of which taught main subjects. So it's really kind of hard to get real, true history from someone who really can't touch topic on that.
Thank you for sharing your experience, and we'll come back to the topic of history as well. Now this gets back to, I understand from each of you, there's a lot more to talk about. So the next question will allow for that. What differences do you see between the segregated and integrated schools based on what your experiences were, both as students and as I hear from Mrs. Kennedy too, as a parent, and Mr. Kennedy as a teacher, and now Ms. Carter here as a student. Can we come back to you, Mrs. Hurd, in terms of what you were thinking of?
I would like to share with you the fact of being a mother and sending your children to an all-white school. So my kids had to go to Matthew Whaley, and I did not, as a mother, trust Miss Etheridge with my children. So I sent my kids to Walsingham for the first 4 years. We struggled to pay for it, but they went. And the first year my kids went to Matthew Whaley, I can remember Miss Etheridge expelling Ernestine Hurd because she had too much mouth. Well, that ran in the family. My mother, me, so she couldn't help herself. But Walsingham had put her on a level that she was above the 3rd grade when she got there. So she was taught by Walsingham to ask questions, why, how come? And they always complained. And I remember Miss Etheridge always sending Ernestine home. And I worked, she sent her expel her. And I went to, I worked the midnight shift then, because I did that because I didn't want my kids to know I was away from home, because they had to be in bed at 9. And I got off at 7, so they were still in bed, and school started at 8:30, so my kids never knew I had a job until they became teenagers and were sneaking my car. But I can remember the last time Miss Etheridge called me to come and get Ernestine because she was unruly. I told her to call the police and have them pick her up, and I would go pick her up at the jail. And she refused to call the policeman. So Ernestine never got sent home anymore after that. But my experience as a mother was really difficult because I didn't want anyone to hurt my kids. And that was the one thing that bothered me. Are they gonna hurt my children?
Thank you, Ms. Hurd. We'll come back to that too. That's important. Ms. Willis, did you care to add something to that?
Well, in going from,
And going from Bruton Heights over to James Blair, First thing we noticed is that, I guess it was a larger building than this, but I didn't have books that said Matthew Whaley like I did at Bruton Heights. We learned going that the students weren't as smart as we were. We're very smart, intellectual people who went to James Blair, I would say. We were intelligent, and we showed more manners. I can only speak for my class, for the 14 of us that went over in 65. But we were always polite and mannerable, and nobody got expelled from school.
Thank you. Mrs. Kennedy, did you care to expound a bit more on your role as a parent or follow up on anything that Mrs. Willis added?
With my children. By the time I became a parent, I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted my children to feel when they were in school, what I wanted them to get from their education, and I wanted to make sure they knew who they were before they went out the door. And so I spent a lot of time teaching my children, as Ms. Willis is talking about. I taught my children respect because my mother taught me respect. I didn't expect the teachers to do that. And I wanted to make it as easy for them to be in school and be taught and not have problems or have someone look at them as a statistic. So I dressed them a certain way, and by that I just mean clean, not so much brands and stuff. I wanted them to know what I expect from them when they went to school, the type of behavior I wanted them to have, but I also went in and met the teachers because I wanted them to see my face, and not just at sporting events. I wanted them to know that I cared about my children and that I was going to partner with them and expect the best from the kids, but if there were issues, I was coming back for them too. And that I wanted to hear about things early, late, whatever. There was no time that they couldn't call me. I didn't care about that. My first concern was my child, and that I was going to be there if they just called me. So if I found out something 2 weeks later and you had plenty of time to call me, I was going to ask you why. But my children knew I was going to ask them too.
Thank you. Did you want to add something, Mr. Kennedy, to describing some of the differences that you see, maybe in reflection, but maybe not with integrated only experience?
Well,
Do you see changes now as a teacher?
I do. It's kind of hard to, as a teacher, I see things not only from a teacher's perspective, but a parent's perspective and a community perspective. So I kind of see everybody's viewpoint. But respect was definitely a key thing. Even when I was in school, my mother would very often tell me, I don't care what those teachers say, they got theirs, you have to get yours. So you had to be polite in that regard. But I still think that happens today with kids. It goes to expectations though. What I see a lot is teachers who don't expect the child to be polite. And so it's very tough. And even from when you start looking at the different backgrounds socially, where you get well-to-do families, Caucasian in particular, they don't know much about my culture other than what they see on TV. And that still holds true today for many of our teachers. They just have a perception, well, they don't understand the culture. Schools are based on middle-class values, and we must realize that all our families that walk into school don't have those middle-class values. But that should not take away, or you should not pretend like your values are more important. Because I quite often hear teachers say, oh, that mom doesn't care. Oh, that parent doesn't care. They don't come to school, or they don't come to conferences, or they don't do this. It's about priorities in life. If we have a mother that's working a minimum wage job, her priorities is roof over her children's head, food, and send them to school clean. So she does care about her children. She may not be able to come to the conferences that our school system established between 8 and 3, which when we're in a community, that is very hard for our working class parents to come to school when conferences are only between 8 and 3. So It's just, I see it very, very different, and it's important for me to say values, you cannot put your values above someone else's.
Thank you for that perspective. And I see you, Mrs. Willis, you have something to add to that?
Yes, I do, because Ms. Kennedy mentioned that she would go to the schools. When my kids, Davita and Verita Mason, were in school, I was there all the time, and especially when they were at Lafayette. And I would get there and see them, blacks here, whites there. And I'm speaking of 82, 90, in the 90s. So it's just been segregated all the way through. But I mostly lived at Lafayette High School. I was there. So the teachers knew they could catch me anytime if they needed me. I was just blessed. I wasn't needed.
Thank you. Since it's hard for you to answer that question, Ms. Carter, we're going to let you answer the next one first. Do you think the schools you attended gave you the opportunities you needed to succeed?
No, and I say that very confidently because we got small bits and pieces as a whole about the main things that schools are required to touch base on in history, which is either slavery or Martin Luther King Jr. And those were the main two topics all throughout school that were addressed. And if it weren't for, though my mother is Caucasian, she definitely instilled in us what the other race that makes us biracial was, and my father's side of the family as well, made sure we knew who we were, and what we represented. So, again, no, I don't think that they gave me or any of my siblings the tools that we needed or that we have today.
Thank you for your honesty. Others, would you care to answer that question in terms of your experiences? Mrs. Heather?
Well, as a mother, I was in charge. So I set the curriculum. And I told them what classes they had to take. And I told them what they needed. And if they were going to be beat to death, they better have taken them. So most of my kids knew Spanish. The mother had none. And I had one to take French and all the science classes. And I think I got that from Bruton Heights because we had what we call industrial arts. And we had girls and boys had to take shop, we had to take home make, you had to take art. Ms. Brooks was our art teacher, and to this day I still can't draw a circle with a compass. But I tried, because we had to have it. And you also had to take type. And boys had to take home ec. So you had to cook, learn how to cook. They taught us how to do laundry. And they made us at Bruton Heights feel that we were superior to the world and that everybody had to go to college. And I can remember William Murray's president asked me, the last one that left, well, why didn't you come to William and Mary? I said, because they didn't have a band. They didn't have a football team. They had one, but they couldn't win nothing. And they didn't have a basketball team that was winning. And Hampton and Tennessee State and them, they were jamming. So we wanted to go there because that was our kind of music. But when I really look back over it, I think, and a lot of people might think I'm wrong, but I think John D. Rockefeller was quite instrumental in putting integration in place. And he put that in place in 1938 when he had affordable housing for families and for single people. There was a place on Prince George Street, I'm having a senior moment, that was for the whites singles, and there was a Franklin House for the black singles, And then the houses in White City and in the colonial area were for family blacks. I grew up in White City. So when you went to work for Colonial Williamsburg, there was black management as well as labor. Because I became the supervisor of 85 white cashiers. And we had a ball because we would all go to the clubs after we got off. Mostly black clubs, because you know black people have this thing about dance and we like to dance. So we enjoyed being together. And I think that kept Williamsburg from being harsh when integration came. And it really shocked us when that boy beat the Jackson boy at the basketball game that night. And then he wasn't even a student at James Blair. They were just there at the basketball game, and he caught the boy in the bathroom, and they beat them with brass knuckles.
Excuse me, Mrs. Sarah, that's okay. You've got good stories for us to hear. Let me redirect us. I'm going to come back to those good stories at some point, but let me redirect us to looking at having strong mentors and role models in the school, and many of you have mentioned that before. White teachers or teachers of color. You've mentioned a variety of ways in which teachers interacted with students. And I'd like you to think for a moment and share with us what made them good mentors or role models. Mrs. Willis, please.
Thank you. I remember at Bruton Heights, Mr. Montague, Mr. Talbot, Hattie Sasser. And I'm telling you now, this has been so many years ago. I celebrated my 50th reunion last year. So it's 51 this year. But I didn't do it. But I had a brother who did, and other people. There was a bakery on Duke of Gloucester Street. Douglas's Bakery. Oh my gosh, I loved it. Mr. Montague be right out there. He'll be right there waiting when they come out. How you doing? You know, going back through the tunnel, go to school. I'm sorry. So he was concerned. Mr. Talbot was concerned. When I went to James, that was in my younger days though at Bruton Heights. When I went to James Blair, Mr. Pitts and Mr. Fulton. Yeah. But I don't think they remembered me or remembered us by name.
Well, I've had some good teachers in Williamsburg-James City County Schools. I've already mentioned one, Ms. Farrington. But Ms. Fuke was also, she taught me English. I specifically remember her because I felt that she believed in me. I was not the greatest writer, but she taught me to love reading. And that was at Lafayette. I had another great teacher, Miss Bobby Alexander. What was great about Miss Alexander was that I had already failed geometry once. But not under her. And then when I got with Ms. Alexander, Ms. Alexander was like the mother of, it seemed like every African-American child that came in that classroom. She was stern. If I didn't do my homework, she would grab me by the ear. But I passed it. I passed that semester with a C. But it was a well-earned C. I worked hard for that C. However, unfortunately, the next semester, I did not have Miss Alexander, and I failed. But Miss Alexander believed in me, and another great person, he was not a teacher, but he was my cross-country coach, Coach Sobel. He was fantastic for me. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He was always asking about my grades. But, you know, the one thing that sticks in my head was that my guidance counselor, I graduated high school with a 1.6 GPA. And I remember him vividly telling me, oh, you'll never go to college. Those are his words. You'll never go to college. I got a scholarship to Norfolk State, but instead of going to college, that was so ingrained in me, I went to the Marines. And so, on some levels, Williamsburg-James City County prepared me for the world, but not in a way you would want your child to be prepared for the world.
Thank you. Ms. Carter, I know that you expressed not having opportunities that you wanted, needed, or succeeding. Can you tell us more about your role models?
Only, is this one on? You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Only one of which was a teacher, and she's still at Lafayette, Miss Rhonda Peterson. She was my econ and personal finance teacher. She helped through a lot of the rough patches. A lot of people, some know, some don't know. I was a senior in high school when I got pregnant with my almost 2-year-old son. But I graduated early, and I was gone for 6 months, and everybody thought I dropped out until graduation day. When I walked across the stage, it's like people saw a ghost. So she was someone who kept hope. In middle school, Lisa Winfield was the student advancement coach, and it's almost like she didn't see color at all. It didn't matter to her. All she was doing was helping those with low self-esteem, helping those who didn't have the best life at home, maybe not the best parents or best situation. And, you know, she did her best to do more than just her job to uplift. And in elementary school, it was Wallsburg, I believe it's Laurel Lane Elementary now. The late Miss Juanita Lee, she was one of the core advisors, and she was more so like family than just a mentor or a friend. She was a woman of color, and she was another one that it was almost like she didn't see color with anyone. She was, how you described, you know, she would check me if need be, and along with all the other kids, and let their parents know, like, yeah, I did, this is what they did wrong, and this is what we're gonna do to move on and not touch back on, you know, that behavior. So those are 3 strong women, independent and very wise women that have helped me in the last 12 years.
Thank you for sharing that. To our whole panel, did you learn about African American history and culture in school?
Didn't know it was such a subject, because all we were ever taught was George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, and Tuskegee. That's where they all were. And it wasn't until Martin Luther King came around that, but I was an adult then, that people, especially blacks, were interested in black history. And then we started moving towards it, and we've been able to find out that so much of it has been untold, not told, and the truth hasn't been spoken about our heritage, the black heritage. Because to me, right now, you know, Bruton Heights taught me this. I'm the most intelligent animal here in Williamsburg. And I believe that, and I've taught that to my kids also. But it's been a learning experience for me when I went to Christopher Newport in 1984. I was going to be an accountant because I had done that for so long. And Calculus 2 kicked me out. I figured I didn't want to be no accountant. So I ended up with a history degree, and I did my student teaching in Guadalajara, Mexico. And I was determined to come back and tell people how the Mexicans felt about Americans. That we were not smart, we didn't have this, and we didn't have that. And I never did get in the classroom. But to me, African American history, and I don't like to say African because I'm a Black American. I'm not from Africa. I know nothing about Africa. I'm a Black American. No one really taught me my Black history. No one really taught me the Black history right here in Williamsburg. I don't have to step off to Tuskegee. I don't have to step off to New York. Right here in Williamsburg, we had some very, very smart people. And I made sure my great-grands know that Mr. Carey was the first Black man to serve on the Williamsburg City Council.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. I hear Mrs. Willis next to you, maybe with something to add to that?
No, I think I would be repeating what she said.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Kennedy?
Just like Ms. Hurd said, I didn't learn anything about Black history. That was totally invisible in school. I think I heard one sentence in the book, slaves came to Jamestown, not Africans, but slaves, and that was it. But that didn't stop me from talking to the people in my family and finding out things that they had gone through. Oral histories from them, because their grandparents and aunts and uncles were always willing to tell you the stories about when they came up. That was better than any book you could read. But when I had my children, especially Black History Month, I used to go to school all the time because my children worked at Colonial Williamsburg with Emily James from the islands. And when Emily finished teaching my children, everybody else's, they wanted to know more. And so when Black History Month came around, they were not standing for just hearing about the same old people. They gave the teachers a list. They went to the Rockefeller Library and looked up what they wanted, took the list to school, and then the teacher sent for me. And I backed them up, said, no, there are many, many more. And so the children weren't wrong, they just needed to do their job. They wanted to know about who they were, and they knew their history didn't just start with slavery. They knew that we existed, our people existed in Africa. There were civilizations and cities and cultures. There were people, the Black tutors, they knew about all of that. And so they actually helped to enlighten the student in the classroom. And some of the teachers did change what they were teaching them in the room and give them a time to bring the stories and the history and express it. So it worked out for them.
Thank you. I see heads nodding. Mr. Kennedy, you want to add to that?
Well, I didn't learn Black history in high school. It just wasn't there. The only Black history I ever learned in high school was if you ask too many questions about other Black people, you become a problem. So you learn not to ask questions about Blacks. And when I say all we ever learn about is Martin Luther King, are there other Blacks? And then I was like, well, this is what we're going to teach you, and this is what you need to know. I just remember being told, this is all you need to know. And then it would just kind of shut you down from asking any other questions about Black history. So my Black history is pretty much real life, day-to-day experience on the white world that I was in.
Thank you for that insight. Mrs. Carter, I saw your head nodding.
So I'm gonna kind of tag off you when you said, that they would kind of shut you off at the questions because what they were teaching you was just on the test for you to advance to the next grade. So what I learned, was pretty much just told, was mainly during Black History Month. Slavery, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, and Rosa Parks. It's really all I remember being told about, not so much taught about, because it was almost like it was a waste of time for the teachers to touch on those subjects, instead of when kids did have questions, answering them in the best way that they knew, instead of just moving on to the next topic. So I'm gonna say no as well.
Ms. Hurd.
I just would like to ask you all, how many of you remember when Colonial Williamsburg was going to auction off some slaves? And I think that made everyone in Williamsburg aware and disgusted, and they had to change their program right in the middle of it, which was great. And I think that made people want to know more about us. But I want to share this with you. I took my great-grands to New York, and we were doing the cruise down the Hudson, and the guy said, New York was the first settlement in America. My 16-year-old great-grandson said, Mama Cook, he don't know what he's talking about. So I said, well, make sure you get him when he come down off the balcony on the boat. And they did. And you know what he told me and my grandkids? New York was the first settlement in America. And that's why they say Jamestown was the first permanent English settlement. Jamestown went to war with New York and took New York, and it became a part of the colony. So when my grandkids got back to school, you know what their teacher got. And she said, oh no. So he had to hand her the brochure. But the thing about it is, integration, I always tell people, was the best thing that happened to blacks, because we found the office, the VIP, and the better jobs. But then integration was the worst thing that happened to blacks, simply because we lost our restaurants. We had 3 newspapers, we lost those. We had holes in the wall, and we did not, I know you don't know what that is, okay? And we did not have to qualify to be a cheerleader or to play football. When my kids went to James Blair, they had to qualify to be a cheerleader. And if they didn't meet the standards or couldn't move like the white cheerleaders, they were not accepted, okay? So that was another issue for this mother. And I always say, our children that we have produced today are the greatest children in the world, because our children today does not look at color.
Thank you. Let me ask this last question, and then we'll open it up for broader questions. What changes would you like to see in the schools today?
You don't want me to answer that.
Ms. Carter has volunteered to go first, so we'll start on this end this time.
Diversity across the board for everyone. And I say that because there's a lot of profiling with one student acting a certain way. They think that his grades are going to reflect like that. Or if, you know, this girl is wearing something that the next race isn't wearing, she's going to act a certain way that the next race isn't going to act. And, you know, it would be nice if there were more teachers as well of color, of different races as well, than just one race teaching everyone, you know, with a group full of students that are now diverse because they were put into those classes versus teachers being able to pick and choose who they want to teach. So diversity is the biggest thing that I think needs to be put into all school systems, because people say it is, but it isn't. If you look at, you know, the statistics when it comes to the, you know, how many teachers are of this race versus the students of another race, it doesn't add up. And it's not fair to the students of a different race to look at the teacher and be like me, confused, because you look just like the teacher I just had, and you guys are trying to teach me something you know nothing about. So.
Mr. Kennedy?
I feel like I need to talk really fast to get all my thoughts in on this one. Well, one thing I would like to go back, I think Ms. Cookie said that her kids don't see color. Here's the thing I tell everyone. I see color. Because you cannot look at me and take away part of my identity by saying I don't see color. The first thing you see when you look at me is a black man. That cannot be ignored. I often tell people that Caucasians who say they don't see color, I think they say it to themselves to make themselves feel good, to kind of want to tell you, I'm not a racist, I don't see color. See my color. Color is extremely important. And you know, I always do a little tagline joke. If your house is robbed and the police officer tell you what does he look like, what's the chances you're going to not say color? You're going to get it, so you see color. What changes I'd like to see in Williamsburg-James City County Schools? The achievement gap, I think that's become so cliche now that we just kind of accept the 35-point achievement gap in our schools among African Americans and whites. How we fund schools in Williamsburg-James City County. I think that is key we need to take a look at. A personal thing for me is the IB program at James River. You know, everyone loves the IB program, but do you know our IB program for our African American boys? Our African American boys at James River have the lowest SOL scores in the state for an elementary IB school. That is sad. And many people don't realize that when you look at the data, 7 other IB programs at the elementary level, our black boys at James River has the lowest SOL scores in the state. So we need to look at that. So that's something I know last year or this year, they did a program evaluation of at James River, talked about how well it was doing. They gave some data. They gave a percentage, I think around 38%, and they celebrated the 38%. And I was like, well, what happened to the 62%? But that's one thing I would definitely like to see change, the funding. And look at the IB program. If we're not going to extend that to middle school and high school, it's pointless to have, especially when we are getting data from James River that we're getting. Diversity among teachers are very important. And I know Mr. Baker's doing a great job. I will acknowledge that. I talked to him, he sent emails out about that. But my bigger issue is, what are the principals doing? Because if we're getting African Americans to get interviews, why aren't they being hired? So that's a question that administrators need to, or the higher ups need to look at. Why aren't African Americans being hired? You know, there's so much more I can say about the changes that I like to see. But I will say this, just because I'm criticizing this issue does not mean I don't love Williamsburg-James City County Schools. I need to be very clear on that. I moved here to raise my kids, and my kids have gone through Williamsburg-James City County Schools. So I do love Williamsburg-James City County Schools, but in order for our school district to be great, we have to look at those things where we're not doing so great at it.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Kennedy?
I'll just piggyback on everything you said to save time, okay? And the only thing I would add to that is I think we all know there's a difference between diversity and inclusivity. So, yes, we need diversity in the faces that are teaching our children, in the administration, all of that. But we also need to be inclusive in the curriculum that we're presenting to all the different groups of children, ethnicities of children that are there. The children need to be able to walk in that school or walk in those classrooms and find something that points to them and uplifts them and their culture and show them that they're not a side note or a footnote, but an integral part of everything that has gone on in building this nation. And so it's up to the adults to do that for them.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. I guess we're all going to piggyback on this one, but I did some research and thinking because my kids are out of the system. My grandkids will not be going to school here. They're out of the state. And I'm long gone out of the system. But I do know Williamsburg-James City County Schools, we need to be equally distributed by race and socioeconomic. And Ms. Hurd spoke about, we had shop, home economics, whatever, at Bruton Heights. Vocational ed, we need to have that. And we need to have as much funding as the advanced placement classes. We need to have that. Also, we need to have our own vocational technical school. I think that would be good for the kids. They need to learn, kids need to learn a trade. And it would be good because we came up with our family having a trade. And they don't have that now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I need about an hour, but I'll do it in 15. For beginners, I want to answer Mr. Canada's question about why we haven't hired black teachers. The bottom line is, when you graduate from college, you have over a $50,000 bill. If you come to Williamsburg looking for a job, there's nowhere to live that you don't pay $1,200 to $1,500 a month. And you get the job, and the job wants to pay you $35,000 a year. And after they take the federal tax out that, and the state tax, and the FICA out that, they might have $10,000 a year to live off. We need affordable housing. We need to have something that attracts people. And the money is not put into the teachers. And if you don't pay, you get what you pay for. Okay? The other one is that I've talked about the homes and the money. I am one of the people that worked with the affordable housing for Williamsburg. We fought hard to get that because nobody wants it in their neighborhood because they feel it's black people coming with crime. It's not true. If you build affordable housing and you're in charge of it, then you, I feel, are responsible for getting those people out of there by educating them financially how to save their money. So when we won the affordable care thing with this board of supervisors, that was the first stipulation I gave that builder. I said, I will not push for this unless every tenant that lives in that apartment that's coming up in Toanna have to go to a financial training class twice a year, simply because we want to teach them how. We got to teach all the time. I don't care what you say. Old, young, we still have to teach them how to save money so they can buy a house in Williamsburg, not stay in the apartment forever. That's what deteriorates our community. And he promised me in writing that they would do those two things with that apartment complex. Every tenant there would have to take a financial training class. I guess the thing about it is they have tried, because I've been on them for the last, I don't know how long, years, about black teachers not being in Williamsburg-James City County. Poor kids cannot go to college and come here and work for this. We have to do something about the money. And we're gonna have to start doing something about even people in Williamsburg that are working for nothing. Because the smart thing is, if you give them somewhere to live, they're gonna spend their money here. But the people we have employed in Williamsburg live in Surrey, Hampton, Norfolk. So they really don't care about Williamsburg. They take their money and their check and they carry it where? Home. So we get nothing. And I hate to change this. I don't need to talk anymore. But the thing that gets me is the fact that we even have nursing homes that can't find people to take care of the sick. Come on, people. Come on, Williamsburg. We got to do better than what we're doing. And the minimum wage has to be raised.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have time for a response from another panelist, or are we wanting to open it up? Okay, Mr. Kennedy.
When it comes to Williamsburg-James City County schools and the hiring, very often, and Williamsburg-James City County is not only the school, less than 2% of teachers in America are African American males. And we very often hear that they don't want to come here because the cost of living is too high. Williamsburg-James City County doesn't pay. What's interesting is, well, I guess all of the white teachers here must be getting a different salary, because I'm confused when we say blacks don't come here because they have debt or what have you. I think that's an easy way to justify not hiring more African Americans, is to say that the cost of living here is too high. I would venture to say, and I haven't done research on it, but the people who know me, I will. I would say, over half of our administrative staff don't live in Williamsburg-James City County. So if you have the leaders not living in Williamsburg-James City County, and if salary is an issue amongst teachers, well, the white teachers work here, so that must mean they must not live in Williamsburg-James City County. We have to look at the bigger issue and not hold on to a falsehood to justify not having a diverse staff here in Williamsburg-James City County. Because we will always hear, oh, this is a problem that's nationwide, nationally. Well, I'm not addressing nationally. I'm asking what can we do here as a community? If we can't hire more African American teachers here in Williamsburg-James City County, why aren't our current teachers being trained in cultural diversity? Why aren't they being trained on Black history? So it has to be, if we're going to stick to, we can't hire more African Americans in this community because we can't get them, okay, even if I buy that, well, it's time to get some training done for our white teachers then, so they can understand the cultural diversity that exists. We cannot hold on to this belief that, well, we can't get them, so, we'll put minimal effort into going out to get them. You just can't have it both ways.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Shall we open it up for questions to the broader audience? Are there any questions?
So Mr. King, are you saying we don't have more Black teachers because there are only more Black male teachers in Williamsburg-James City County because there are only 2% of people in college studying to be Black educators? Or I'm trying to understand, if we need more Black educators in Williamsburg-James City County, is it a problem with supply, or is it a problem with some other issue? Help me understand.
It's kind of both. It is both. It's a supply issue, and part of the supply issue is that we keep holding on to this narrative that teachers don't make any money. Well, if you constantly tell children that teachers don't make any money, what is the likelihood that a child is going to that profession? It's the same thing with nurses and social workers and all our service field. If you raise children to tell them that this profession does not make any money, what is the likelihood that that child is going to go into that profession? So we as adults keep spreading this narrative that teachers don't make any money, that's not a profession to go into. But nationwide, only about 2% of all male teachers are African American. So did I answer your question? Well, retention. Even when we get African American teachers here in Williamsburg-James City County, we lose them. They may stay 1 to 2 years and they're gone. The one thing we do a great job at in Williamsburg-James City County is hiring administrators, diversity. We have a very diverse staff of administrators and those people higher up. But we don't do that for our teachers, the very people who are directly in front of our children. We don't do that. And even when we get them, we don't do a good job in keeping them. That is the bigger issue. If you have a supply issue, you need to make sure once you get them, you put things in place to keep them. And that is extremely important. And I'm hoping, Williamsburg-James City County just hired my niece. She's an elementary teacher at Stonehouse. And I'm really hoping, she sticks around. But we do have a problem keeping minority teachers. My sister, who has a degree in special ed, she was a teacher's assistant in Williamsburg-James City County. She applied. Well, she's teaching in Richmond now. Self-contained, low incidence special ed. So we have a problem on keeping our teachers here.
Thank you.
I'll also poke a hole a little bit into the salary narrative because I recently moved here from Massachusetts, and very grateful to have gotten a job at Jamestown High School, and when I plugged the salary offer into a online salary calculator, anecdotally, I was impressed. I was like, okay. It was like a significant increase in salary from what I was making in the Boston area, so I'm doing okay. You know, it would be great if teachers got paid even more, but I, you know, could poke a hole in that a little bit and encourage others to go into teaching in that regard. And I think my question is similar to what you guys have already addressed, but you had mentioned how being a teacher in a school environment is being in a white middle class environment. And I wonder if retention has a lot to do with changing that environment to make it more comfortable for non-white people to be working there. And I just wonder what you think we could be doing in schools to create a climate that non-white people would want to stay and stick around and work in. What are those changes that school employees can and should be making? Does that make sense? To create a better climate for retention?
Well, it makes perfect sense. But you have to be open to having those tough conversations. And whenever you have a conversation about race, it's tough. And it's extremely tough if you are the lone African American in a building. It's very hard to have those conversations. I am the lone African American male at the school I teach in, and so it's even tough being a male in elementary education. And being an African American male in elementary education makes it even difficult. But you have to be willing to have courageous conversations. And those conversations very often need to be opened up by leadership in the building. Because if leadership creates an atmosphere, a trusting atmosphere amongst the staff, anybody can ask a question and not feel targeted or intimidated, and that's what you need to do.
Hello there. I'm a graduate of Lafayette, proud graduate, first class, 1974. Went to Blair, probably went to school with some of your relatives. And I have a friend in particular who's a black friend of mine here in town, and I moved away for many years and came back. And he and I work together. I work at Woodside High School down in Newport News, and I'm a teacher down there. And we have a lot of conversations about race and racism, white privilege, things like that, that I try to talk a lot about in my classes. I teach sociology, and that's one class where I can talk about anything. And my kids seem to appreciate the fact that I do that. But one thing that my friend said to me one day was, we were talking about when we were growing up, and I said, well, we were all really tight back then. And he said, well, one thing you need to think about is that this would have been the mid-70s, he said there were two Williamsburgs. There was white Williamsburg, there was black Williamsburg. And he said, you as a white person knew how to get around in white Williamsburg. He said, I had to know how to get around in both white and black Williamsburg. And there were so many things that he brought up to me that back in those days, I never thought about, ever. I never knew about Log Cabin Beach. I didn't know that existed. There was lots of things that I did not know about. I'm curious, do you think there is still a white Williamsburg and a black Williamsburg? And how do we bridge that?
Yes, I do, especially amongst the younger kids, because I feel like it starts at home. You should teach your children in a way that you would want somebody else to treat them. You mentioned the white supremacy, not supremacy, privileges. And I think around high school, elementary school, middle school, a lot of the white children did think that they had privileges. I've dealt with children for a very long time in a teacher's position, and then just as a parent, sister, whatever the case may be. And there are a lot of younger children who feel as if they have privileges because they have not been told otherwise. And they take that to school, and they take that out in public, and they take that around their friends. And that sort of, character is building, and that is what is hurting a lot of the kids when it just comes to kids. And when it comes to the adults not addressing that situation, regardless if it's a teacher or a parent, it's still something that should be addressed. It exists everywhere, not just Williamsburg, everywhere. But since we are just talking about Williamsburg, I think it starts at home, and that parents should do a way better job of addressing race issues or anything to do with anything outside of their race with their children correctly. And if they are confused or don't know the answers, then they need to let their children know that I don't know the answer. We might have to ask someone else, because Google doesn't always have all the right answers.
I grew up in Portsmouth, Virginia, and listening to y'all talk, I went to segregated schools. The year I graduated from high school, I went to Wilson High School, and Norcom High School was their black equivalent. It was a fantastic high school. The year that I graduated, they closed the schools in Norfolk. I went to college at Longwood. It was $750 a year for the whole year. I mean, that's how old I am. But the schools were closed for black children. There were no schools for 8 years in Farmville, Virginia. I started teaching, and schools were segregated to an extent. And at one point, I went back to Wilson and taught, and it was probably 75% black and 25% white. A lot of the teachers that had been at Norcom were teaching there, and I taught science. And the head of the science for the whole city was black. The head of the department where I was black. I'm sorry, Joe. And it sounds like crickets. But the head of the science department for the city was black. The head of the department I was in was black. And I would talk to these teachers, and I've never taught anywhere or been anywhere that was worked together as well. I mean, I really think a lot of friendships came out of that school. And if I asked the woman that was head of science at Norcom, well, what was it like when they integrated? And she said, we lost so much, and listening to y'all talk reminds me of so many of these people. They were bright, they were smart, the school that they taught in was well disciplined, the children were well behaved, and instead of things staying at that level, and the level for white people staying at a level, everything dropped. I still haven't quite figured out what happened. But that one year that I went back to Wilson and it was segregated, I felt like, integrated again. I felt like, okay, it's not perfect, but we gained something because there were actual, really close, good friendships. And the same thing with the kids. It's not perfect, but I can remember so many things growing up that were, as a white person, hurtful for me to see how you were treated. And there's still some of that. There's still too much of that. But we have made some progress, so we've got to keep trying and keep working on it. But I am really hopeful. Maybe our children, because when my children went to school, they were in the 80s. They had a lot of black friends. A lot of them spent the night. I was friends with a lot of the parents. But now the schools are more segregated again. So I feel like we're going backwards. We've got to keep working at it. And I think having something like this, it's not nearly enough time to talk about it and to see what we can do. But y'all lived through all of it. I saw all of it. I didn't have to live through it like we did, but I saw enough and got to talk to enough people that I really think we can do something.
Hi, I came today because I taught in Berkeley. I taught at Berkeley when Berkeley was a high school. Berkeley was an all-black high school, and I taught there in 1967, 68. And I was hoping that I might see some of my colleagues from that year, which was extremely formative for me. I was a young graduate from William and Mary who had absolutely no background in teaching, but I thought I could teach. I don't know, they hired me and put me at Berkeley. And the people that I taught with taught me how to teach. And I just wanted to mention some of their names because I thought that this was 50 years, and I just wanted to honor some of the people that were so influential in my life. And it was Bobby Alexander, of course. She was wonderful, and she actually taught my children when they were at Lafayette. Tom Fallon and his wife, Thomasina Fallon. Jade Palmer, Mr. Bowman, Rudel Blair and his wife were wonderful physical education teachers. I remember them so fondly. Oscar Prater, who was my absolute best friend, and we used to shamefully share cigarettes. Still smoke in the teacher's lounge. One of the smartest guys I ever knew, a math teacher. We had classrooms side by side. And Jackie Prater, his wonderful first wife, who sadly passed away. Mrs. G, who was a force in her own. Clemenza Braxton, Mr. Brown, who was our principal. That was one of the most wonderful years that I ever spent as a teacher. And it was because of those people. They were so welcoming for me in where I did quite stand out in school. But I never felt unwelcomed in the slightest. And it was for a girl who grew up in segregated Virginia, it opened my mind. It was a wonderful experience.
Hi, thanks for all your comments today. I have 2 teenagers in WJCC schools, and one of my children is at Jamestown High, and she's a senior there now. I hear stories from her about openly white supremacist comments that get made regularly, and they seem to go unchallenged by teachers and administration. Is this true? Yes. Do you also hear these stories? And what can we do about it?
It is, and I can say that from people, there was a lot of kids my age who would joke about things like that, and I said earlier, that starts at home. It's not fair that you are allowing your children to disrespect other races and people in the way that they are with what they think are jokes. A lot of the children who do that don't do their research on what these groups actually were or what they did. They just continue to make the jokes because they feel as if they're privileged enough to do so because of the color of their skin. And again, I'm going to say it again, it starts at home. And the teachers, the principals, they should address it, but I feel as if they're afraid to start that conversation because they don't know what the ending might look like. They don't want to be challenged in that way to have to defend one race or the other, one student or the other, the families, whatever the case may be. It's just not okay.
Were there other responses from our panelists to that question? Mrs. Willis?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I don't know how many in here today born here, been here all your life. I have. This is home for us. And what gets me is, we say we're going uptown, because we live down the Grove, whatever. We're going uptown. And when I get uptown, yeah, I know, but when we come uptown, it's like people are driving around, looking at you. You're not from here, but they act so superior. And that is something that, it irks me so much that is done. Because it's like you don't care about anyone but yourself.
Yes. everything starts at home. And I believe that a lot of things start at home, but I also believe that a lot of things happen because we're not brave enough to stand up and say something when we see that it's wrong. So just as the young lady said that some teachers are not willing to stand up and address things because of fear, the same thing happens with students. They allow fear to coerce them into behaviors that they know are inappropriate, that they know would not be acceptable in their homes. And so I would just say that, you know, I'm really one of these people that think about the generalities of things. And in general, I wouldn't say that all people are sitting at home expressing white supremacy or that, you know, we don't want to do this and we don't want to do that. I believe that a lot of things are occurring in our community because we're not brave enough to stand up and take the flack that comes from our taking a stand.
And I just wonder if we have leaders here at Williamsburg-James City County Schools. So to the gentleman who brought that issue up, I think it's important to let the community know. And I'm sure, I like to think that the leaders here heard you. Because action would need to be taken, or at least a conversation at the very minimum, would need to take place first and foremost. But yes, I totally agree with actions. You know, we still live in a very segregated community, guys. We may not want to acknowledge that, but we do. You know, when I taught Newport News, the moment they found out I live in Williamsburg, oh, you must be rich. That's the line I get all the time. You must be rich because only white people live in Williamsburg. And then, you know, I had to say, no, we have black people live there. And here's the irony in all this, though. When I say we have black people, I named the 5 or 6 neighborhoods. See, I can't say there's black people all throughout Williamsburg because we are still largely segregated. But I can tell you, if you want to know where the population of African Americans are, I can tell you the neighborhoods. You know, and that's the thing about our community. It requires those courageous conversations. If there is an issue, bring it up. I mean, we have to put our leaders on the spot sometime because I kind of feel like they get bogged down in the minutia of everything else leading and they miss those things that can have a drastic impact on communities, on families. I think every parent sends their best child to school. They don't have a better child, they keep it at home to watch TV. They send their best possible child to school. And a lot of us as parents have what I consider blind trust. I'm sending my kids to school and I'm gonna trust that they're gonna be fine and you can teach them everything they need to know. And that's why we're taking on more and more responsibilities as teachers in schools because parents are sending their kids to school with a level of blind trust. But we have to have those conversations. And those conversations, I'll say again, start with leadership. Because we can only control within our walls of buildings. And that comes from leaders. They have to recognize these issues. You know, I think it's important for our leaders to go into the neighborhoods. Because sadly, I believe some of our leaders have never even gone into some of the neighborhoods of the children that they oversee in their building. Perhaps they need to get on a school bus and ride through the neighborhood so they can see. Because it's one thing to stand back and make judgments where you have no connection or, oh, I don't know where that's located. It's completely different when you drive through a neighborhood and you see kids outside playing. Or maybe they're not outside playing. Maybe it's that kind of neighborhood. Maybe they're in the house because it's safer in the house than the neighborhood. But leaders should be out in the communities, making themselves known to establish those relationships among our community members and our parents, instead of just saying, oh, the parent doesn't care, or this, and that. Get out to the neighborhoods, talk to the parents.
I would like to say this. You know your history, okay? Williamsburg from 1935 on before was 85% black, okay? And then John D. Rockefeller gave us money to build that beautiful brick house. And we sold our property in the city of Williamsburg. so we could have an acre of land or 2 acres of land as opposed to a lot. And everybody that lived in Williamsburg owned property. James City County, Towana, Chickahominy, and we never thought about how they took economics and pushed blacks out of Williamsburg. And it worked. Right now, Williamsburg is more segregated than it was when I was born, and I was born in 1941. More segregated now. It's like we have forgotten, or they have forgotten, or the people that have come here have never experienced sharing or living with other people that are different from them. And I think we need to show up at the Board of Supervisors meetings and let them know. And we need to also, I don't know why they stop parents from coming to the schools and you have to make an appointment to go to the school now. But when my kids were in school, you could go there, and if William was acting bad, I could snatch him right up out of that class, you know? But now I have to make an appointment and apply all these credentials, and the bad people still get in the schools and shoot them up. So I think we need to have a better open door policy where parents can come in and help monitor what's being taught to their kids as well. Not to go in there to upset the teacher. And if you feel like you want to upset the teacher, and I think that's why some of those rules are in place, because parents came in and wanted to take over the class. But you need to listen, and then you go back home and you get your kids straight. But I think we should have more vision than just boxing them all in. Now, as far as, I still say the income level has a lot to do with hiring black teachers. I really do. And until someone can really prove to me it's different, then I might go for that. But this year now, the teachers are getting, the entry level will be raised to $40,000 a year, which is going to be better. And I'm hoping, because I have been riding their backs for the last 10 years about black teachers being in there, especially black men, because our boys need some mentors, we really do. And I think about how Coach Blair and all those guys and Mr. Hunter would take you around the corner, you know, and we don't know what took place with the boys around the corner, but it was never pleasant. And I think we need that. You know, it's okay, but we need some of that. But the income does have a lot in where you live in Williamsburg. And the people that come here to work could care less about our city.
We'll have one more question from Shannon over here.
This has been a blessing for me just to hear from just generations of people. I'm not quite from here, but my question is, as a young person, I feel like often we're not ignored per se, but like what can I do as a young adult, not necessarily in high school, but in college, to help with some of the changes that you guys said you wanted to see? And I wrote them all down, but like where's my place in that battle that you guys have kind of been fighting for decades?
Make sure you finish college and come back to Williamsburg.
All right, so we promised it would be some robust and interesting conversation, and I think the panel definitely lived up to the promise. What do you all say? Again, we are, as the village, commemorating the 50th anniversary of integration in Williamsburg-James City County Schools, and we celebrate you all, and we thank you for contributing today, but sadly enough, we're still here having the same conversations that we had 50 years ago when we started this thing. Okay, so there was a hope, and there were dreams, and a lot of that was lost. And those are some of the things that we lost. And we need to continue to have the conversations about the things we lost in order to make the gains. So instead of making the promises, let's do the work. We are here to have a conversation. The village has laid the groundwork, I do believe, to do the work here in our community. We talk about being the blueprint within our mission statement. We want our community to be the blueprint for communities all across this country, to make equity at the forefront of what you're doing in your schools. Make sure that all students have the tools they need to be successful, that all students are able to achieve. And I'm gonna tell this story and then I'm gonna hand it over to some other folks. But I attended a Head Start graduation last year. And I'll tell you, it was very emotional for me. And the reason being was because those children, every single child on that stage, no matter what race they were, no matter where they came from, they were all doing the same thing. They were happy. They were engaged. Their teachers were showing them love. They were singing in Spanish and counting in Spanish, you know, and doing all of that. And then you go to first grade, second grade, third grade. And so we know children get lost along the way. Third grade. Middle school, kids get lost. Gifted students. We talk often about children who aren't able to stay on grade level, but think about the gifted students as well. Gifted students isolated within that building, isolated and not getting that same feeling of culture and community and being embraced. And I'll tell you, because I know about that. These are experiences that we have lived, and we appreciate all the folks that come together with us to discuss these things and who want to make things better. But embrace our stories and that we live this. Embrace it and join us as we move forward to make things better in our community and in our schools. The village is now partnering with the College of William and Mary and Williamsburg-James City County Schools to do something that I think is going to be groundbreaking, and that's doing a curriculum on African American history from our community. We've actually been given the go-ahead, I do believe, to start working on an African American Culture Club, and that'll be at one of our schools. And we will continue to do our tutoring, the 3 pillars of the village: mentoring, tutoring, and advocacy. So give your time, volunteer your time to tutor a kid. And we talk about Black teachers not being able to get into the schools. Well, there's the village. We don't pay anything, but the pay that you'll get in return is helping the kid. And we ask tutors to sign up and come and volunteer with us. We thank you, Williamsburg-James City County Schools, for embracing us and allowing us to come into your buildings and do the things that we do. And we thank you for the things that you are doing for our children and the greatness that you do pour into our children, because there are many, many success stories. But there are those who fall in the cracks, and that's why we're here today. And we just want to join with you all, and anything that we can do to help you along the way is what we're here for. And we appreciate you, and we celebrate you, and we thank you. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. There are a couple of people I know that we're going to get up and say something. If you are still at that time that you would like to say something, please feel free to. If not, we'll go ahead on out to the reception, but you are welcome to speak a little bit on your thoughts on integration if you would like to. So Senator Tommy Norman is going to come forth and say a little something.
Cookie, how you been?
Glad to have you.
Good, good. I'm Tommy Norman, and I am not here with any political hat on. I am here because I was a product of the school system in the 1950s, the 1960s, and the 1970s. Also, I happen to have the privilege of being the co-chair of the 2019 commemoration of Jamestown, Yorktown. And I'd like to say just a couple of things. Young lady, I think you are absolutely mostly right that it starts at home. And when I was growing up in Williamsburg, I did not learn about blacks at home. I did not learn about it at home. But that didn't mean that I didn't interact with them. I think the first real interaction I had with the black community was in a place that some of you will remember was below Gymnasium at the College of William and Mary. And at Below Gymnasium on Sundays, some of the young black men from Bruton Heights would come there, and some of the white boys from James Blair High School would come on Sundays and we'd do a pickup basketball game. And it was not blacks and whites, it was a mixed team. And that's where I first made some friends that have continued over a lifetime. I remember going to Bruton Heights School and watching Dwayne Freeman play with quarterback on the football team, and there weren't a lot of folks here that looked like me. Tony Conyers has become a great friend of mine, on it, even though he went to school in West Virginia after he left here. But Tony and I ended up playing on the first M-rated basketball team in the community league here in Williamsburg. So I made the friendships, but where I really learned it was from my kids. My oldest daughter is a teacher in Jameson County, and she's been to DJ Montague and is now at Matoko. And she taught in Richmond, as someone here will know, and she was teaching in a predominantly minority school and left to come home to Williamsburg, where she started teaching because she felt the calling. My youngest daughter, who is quite precocious, went to the University of Virginia, and she was very blessed. She majored in Black history.
Wow.
Majored in Black history. And the only thing she ever asked me since I've been in public office is when Desmond Tutu came to Williamsburg, Dad, I'd like to see you. The only thing she's ever asked me in 40 years, it has been tied in to what I do in public service. My former wife was a teacher when we first got married in Newport News in a predominantly minority school. And it has been through her and my kids that I really had the first exposure on it. But shifting a little bit, as Cookie knows, I served on the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and yes, I remember the slave auction. And I didn't know whether to be appalled or how to handle it, to be very truthful with you. But since I've been on this Colonial Williamsburg board, we have tried to push more exposure on Black education. We are not there yet. We are not there, but we're trying to make some progress on that. I chaired the 2007 commemoration at Jamestown, and we broke it down into 3 categories, one of which was the Black category, and gave them independence and autonomy on the programming. That was just a start. Where we have come since 2007 and what's going on in this 2019 commemoration has been extraordinary, I think, because it has put a finer point on it. I do not think we're there, but clearly we have, and you talk about greater emphasis in the books that they're using, obviously a great deal of pressure. There was nothing in the 4th and 7th grade when I took history in the Williamsburg-James City County Schools, nothing. But we're doing a lot more on that. I was down there just a few weeks ago at Fort Monroe when we had the commemoration on the arrival of the first African Americans, not Black Americans, they were African Americans. And the incredible turnout and the power of those voices. So I thank you for the powerful message that you all have delivered today. But believe me, there are people who are listening and there are people who are trying to do things. So thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts this afternoon. I just have 2 quick things. We're talking about integration. And the senator just talked about the 400 commemoration. The original sin of the United States is race. And today, as a result of that, we're still dealing with that original sin. We're still talking about integration and how it's affecting us today. I was at the commemoration as well. And Senator Warner said, we have to tell the truth about American history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm glad to hear that there's a movement afoot to actually incorporate real history in our schools. The second thing I want to say is, we talked a little bit about, Mr. Kennedy, you talked a little bit about leadership. We got to hold the school board accountable. We got to hold the board of supervisors accountable. We have to hold our leaders accountable at all levels if we want to see real change. So with that, I don't want to be political either. So again, thank you all. Thank you all for coming out. Jackie, I appreciate what you all are doing. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know.
appreciate what you all do for our community as well, and for being here with us. We're going to adjourn to the reception out in the foyer. We have some goodies for you, so please stay and partake, please. Thank you so much.